Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting live from our home in Venice, California. This is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And welcome, Caireann Frasca. She is a woman who's walked the path of the Celtic and Avalonian goddess mysteries for more than 20 years, and she will be talking about the divine masculine and feminine archetypes from these pantheons. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi everybody, sorry about that, Krista. I accidentally hit your mute button for like 1 second, so when you play it back, you'll hear a little disruption, but that was my fault for being dyslexic for a minute. We have all kinds of great stuff coming up. We're planning our shows right now for June, and Krista's dad's going to come back and talk about past life stuff. We're going to do some Crowley stuff and all kinds of cool things. Next week, we have our good friend Madame Zalima back, and she's going to be talking about protection magic, and I think something we can all use with COVID and so forth, so we're excited about that as well. We're going to just have everybody go to our website and get the latest information. And we are now doing a newsletter. So while you're there, please sign up and subscribe for our newsletter. We'll give you some links to some of our past shows that we really enjoyed. And if there's any announcements and so forth, comes out once a month. And we promise we won't spam you to death and everything like that. And also you can buy us a coffee on Ko-Fi while you're there. And thank you to everybody who has. It really helps cover the cost of the show. We appreciate it. Makes us feel appreciated. As a Canadian, you know, I can never have too much coffee, so please, yes, buy me a coffee. And it's sixthsensesociety.com, SIXTH, all spelled out. So don't want to take too much time, so I'm going to kick it back to Krista and Caireann. We're going to have a blast, so go for it, Krista.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And again, we're here with Caireann Frasca talking about the divine masculine and feminine archetypes of Avalon. So welcome, Caireann.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm very excited to be talking with you. And I thank Renee for introducing us. That's very auspicious of her. And I've already talked to you, and I really had a great time talking and meeting you beforehand. My first question, I think, is how were you first drawn into the Avalonian and the Celtic mythologies and pantheons?
From a very young age. So my mother was actually born in Yorkshire, England, and she lived there until she was about 18 and came to the States as a nanny, where she met my father. And as I was growing up, we would take family vacations in England every now and then. And there was something that just grabbed me from the age of 5 or 6, I think was the first visit. And I just felt at home there. And as I got older and went back a few times, it really, I became fascinated with the stories and the fairy tales. And there was something about the land and the countryside. My relatives live right on the edge of the moors that Wuthering Heights made famous. And it's just magical. And so the more that I was there, the more I wanted to learn more about the history of Britain and the Celtic lands and Ireland. And I started diving into, first through fiction, then through researching magical traditions, mythology, legends, and all of that. And it captured my heart and soul at a very, very young age, and it remains today.
The Arthurian legend and mythology is really quite complex, I find. I took a course when I was in college at NYU, and I did not do very well in it. It was kind of researching all of the different original stories and some of the I guess, differences too, and crossovers. So what would you suggest if somebody was interested in, for instance, anything around the Arthurian legends? Where would they start?
So I think if you're interested in the Arthurian legends in a more esoteric, or looking at them in a more esoteric framework with a lot of scholarly integrity, I would start with the work of Caitlin and John Matthews. They've got a wonderful series of books all around the Arthurian legends and the deeper spiritual meanings to the stories and the symbolism and the spiritual practices based around the quest and the search for the Holy Grail. So I would definitely start there. There are also some great books by Jean Marcal, who is a French author. He pulls in a lot more of the Grail mysteries. They overlap with the stories of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, the divine feminine, divine masculine coming together, and Mary Magdalene being the Holy Grail. The traditions of the troubadours who carried these stories in a very subversive way around Europe. He's got a lot of really interesting things to say as well. So he's somebody I would recommend too.
Well, that's great. So let's maybe talk a little bit broadly about your view of what you would consider the divine masculine and feminine archetypes, even, beyond a particular pantheon.
So in all of us, there are masculine and feminine energies, and the divine feminine archetypes, to my mind, and the ones that I find in Avalon include people like the High Priestess in the form of Morrigan Le Fay. Every woman has that High Priestess within her, whether she realizes it or not. You've got the Queen archetype, which is represented by Guinevere. You've got Mother Mary, who's, Queen of Heaven and Mother to all. And Mary Magdalene, who's actually, some believe is the Holy Grail. Some believe that she represents it. But those are some of the archetypes that I find in Avalon that all women really embody. You've also got the divine masculine in King Arthur. So he's a king, which every man carries that king energy within him. There's Lancelot, the knight. His archetypal energy is more challenger and champion. So he's a defender of the divine feminine. He's also a challenger to the king in the legends, to King Arthur. You've got Merlin, the wild man of the woods. The most adept magician of the time, druid. So his connection to nature, that so many of the that men embody in that divine masculine aspect. And then you've got, Gwyn ap Nudd, who is the god of the underworld. He is in charge of the wild hunt and gathering souls and bringing them to the other world. He's the fairy king. He lives under Glastonbury Tor. So he's kind of a darker aspect of the masculine archetype, but not dark in a negative sense. He's more mysterious, and his role is essential, and his energy is essential. So those are some of the archetypes that I find there.
So it is interesting that when you think of the pantheon, you include the Christian. Is that because of Glastonbury?
Yes. So Glastonbury is considered the earthly realm to Avalon, which is the otherworldly realm, and they live in parallel with each other. So in my mind, Glastonbury is a gateway to Avalon and vice versa. So it's a liminal space where the border between those worlds is very porous, and we can travel back and forth between them. Yes, Glastonbury, it is said that Joseph of Arimathea, after the crucifixion, brought Mary Magdalene to Glastonbury. Joseph himself founded the first church in England and dedicated it to Mother Mary. He was really dedicating it to Mother Mary as goddess. And this is one of the most fascinating things I find about Avalon. It is a place where all of these traditions converge, and they're not so different as they might seem to be on the surface. There are so many connections between the goddess worshiping pagan ways and the early Christian ways, which are not the Christian ways of today necessarily. The roots of that religion were quite different from what we see a lot today in what's called organized religion.
Sure. I would say, though, if you were to look at the political side of the pagan movement, there's a lot of pain around, and rightfully so, around not only the pagan versus Christian, but Irish versus the English. So even, within that concept of, for instance, you working with both Irish deities yourself and Avalon, that could be, I suppose, a way of trying to heal it. But at the same time, there's definitely some deep wounds there.
That is the truth. The last course that I released through Mother House of the Goddess is called Into the Heart of Avalon. And when I first launched it, I got quite a bit of feedback saying, I'm not going back to the Christian. I don't want to know anything about it. I'm on the side of the goddess and the pagans, and that's it. And I completely understand and respect that feeling. A lot of people have had terrible experiences, and I don't blame them for not wanting to go back there again. From my perspective, I think that it can be quite healing, actually, to my mind, what happened with the church and with all of the things that have gone on. That's what happened when humans got a hold of it and started manipulating it for their own power and control and greed and all of that. The essence of the teachings, if we go all the way back to the time of Jesus and what he was actually teaching, I'm not speaking for him, but I think that he would be pretty disgusted with, a lot of what has gone on in the name of the church and in his own name. So, he was back there flipping tables and everything back, when he was around, not having the nonsense. And I think he would feel the same way now. So what I would encourage people to do, if there is an inkling of interest, or there's something nagging that they don't want to let go of, I would encourage people to go back and look at what he originally taught. To that end, there are legends about Jesus actually visiting England and Glastonbury specifically and studying with the Druids. There's a lost period of time that there's no official record of, basically from his teens to his late 20s. And, there's no official word on what he was up to during that time. And one of the legends that there is some evidence for is that he went with his uncle. Joseph of Arimathea. He was a tin trader, and there were tin deposits all up and down the British coast. And he would have been very familiar with Glastonbury, and he would have known Avalon for the power center that it is. He would have met potentially the Druids. So there is a school of thought that says that Jesus actually studied with them and learned quite a bit from them before he went on to study, as some believe, in India, after which he returned to Palestine and created his ministry. So, the paths overlap quite a bit if you go back far enough. And it can be quite healing. I will say, I was getting visited by Joseph of Arimathea and Jesus in my meditations quite a lot, and I could not understand why. I was well down the path of the goddess. I did not understand why they wanted to they kept tapping me on the shoulder, and it really wouldn't let me go until I started diving into some of this research and history, and I thought, oh, that's why. And it all kind of converges again in Glastonbury, Avalon.
Yeah, I think that's the appeal of Myths of Avalon, the book, that that's the first place I ever read where the convergence was pointed out, I guess, even though I'm sure it's not the first book that was written, but I know many people have read that book and were deeply affected, as is, any of the Arthurian books. that there's something about Camelot and the Knights of the Round Table that appeal to the imagination throughout time and to many people. So why do you think that is?
I feel this way about the Arthurian legends as well as Celtic mythology, is that there's something that feels very fresh and current about it all. The stories can be applied really to situations in our own lives today. So I think we can relate, and they resonate deeply also because there's deep symbolism and archetypal situations and characters in these stories that just, as humans, we respond so deeply to story. And when something feels true, we just know it. One of the things I've been thinking about lately, in terms of the parallels between Camelot and what's going on in the present day, there's, in the legends, there's discussion of the wasteland. And this basically comes about because the king has betrayed the sacred contract with the goddess. So in Arthurian times, in ancient Celtic, the ancient kings of Ireland, there was a ceremony where the king had to symbolically marry the goddess of the land. In the Arthurian stories, she's represented by Guinevere, and that contract was sacred. And once it was made, he promised to protect the land. He promised to care for its people and all the living things upon it. He promised to do his best to rule fairly and justly. If that contract was broken, then the land would fall fallow. The people would become miserable and starve. And really, this is a metaphor for the disrespect of the feminine principle, of the divine feminine. And I think we see that today in the way that we treat the earth. Look what's happened since COVID happened, right? The ozone layer is healing itself at a more rapid rate than it would have even if we had stayed in the Paris Agreement here in the States. Animals are roaming, free in the streets. Mother Nature is sort of resurging and re-blossoming. And it's because we are not doing as much harm as we were. So I think about that, and I think about the earth. The earth does represent the divine feminine. That's really an embodiment of the divine feminine. And if we continue to mistreat it and exploit it, these are the kind of things that are going to happen. We've been seeing more hurricanes and more earthquakes and natural disasters. We're seeing this, pandemic come along that has really caused a lot of people to have to step back and think, what am I doing? What am I doing? How am I living my life? How am I treating the resources at my disposal? So I do feel like we're in something of a wasteland at the moment, and we've got a real opportunity here to reassess how we move forward after this. And if we can bring that divine feminine back into balance with the masculine, the divine masculine, I think that's the best way forward.
I do agree that what's happening is really very beneficial for the earth, and that there is a imbalance with the divine feminine. But I had a kind of a scrying experience about 15 years ago, and I entered into the goddess kind of searching for her and only focused on her. And then I came across a couple books that were about balancing the male and female, and that's really what I like to do. But in my meditation, it was more about the wounded king and the goddess helping the wounded king, because the divine feminine technically never went away. We always had Mother Mary. Certain aspects of the feminine were suppressed, such as the warrior goddess, but she really didn't go away. And I also feel like consciousness is always moving and expanding. So I feel like it's supposed to kind of be a little bit of a different story. Okay, we learned about matriarchy, we learned about patriarchy. How are we going to learn about both? But I was even kind of surprised with it sort of really touched me, the whole part of the wounded king. and you see that in Lord of the Rings too with Aragorn. It's very deep emotionally, and for me as a woman, even because all women have kings in them too. We all have the divine masculine, feminine that we relate to. So, what is your take on the idea of the wounded king being part of the solution in the sense of the healing process, using the Avalonian pantheon as a great example of how to work with it?
I love that you asked this, because Arthur is the perfect example of the wounded king, and the Fisher King in the stories. And the way that he's always called the once and future king. And I feel that his story during his time on Earth it's almost a cautionary tale of what happens when you push the feminine to the side and you get too caught up in, gaining power and influence and, expanding your control and that kind of a thing. It always needs to be tempered. The interesting thing is the sword Excalibur that there are two sets of beliefs. One is that he pulled Excalibur from the stone, and that was the sign that he was the king. The other is that the sword was actually bestowed on him by Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, depending on which version you read. But Merlin was always cautioning him about Excalibur is powerful, but it's the sheath that's actually the more valuable item. And the sheath represents the feminine. The sword, is obviously a phallic symbol. The sheath is a feminine symbol. And he said, if you go into battle, Merlin said, without that sheath, there's going to be trouble. That's what's going to protect you more than the sword itself. And of course, he neglected to follow Merlin's advice. And he went into that final battle at Camlan after Morgan Le Fay had actually stolen the sheath from him due to his betrayal, and he was mortally wounded. And then sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, so Morgan and some of the other priestesses of Avalon came to collect him and bring him to Avalon for healing. And here's where I kind of took a long way around in getting there, but this is the opportunity for the wounded king to heal himself, because the thread that runs through all of the Arthurian stories about the Grail quest, the Grail quest is really a quest for the lost feminine, or the feminine that had been subverted. So he couldn't get there in life, but he actually was able to reconnect with the goddess after all in Avalon, where he is said to rest until Britain has need of him once again. My belief is that this is the time where he is able to heal that wound in him. He's able to integrate the divine feminine into his being along with the divine masculine. And in that way, he's going to come back better and stronger. So I think that is what he is doing, is healing until, his energy is such that he can come back and save us from ourselves.
Well, it's interesting. So in a way, we ought to see, if that's happening, a reflection in art. And Michael and I have been watching Lucifer, the show Lucifer, and in which Lucifer is the fallen angel, of course. And even though this is not really connected to the Avalonian, it does relate to the wounded king. He is a wounded king. And it's a really compelling series, really, really interesting and deep, and it does have a lot to do with the healing of the feminine and the wounded king, and just a more modern kind of view of it, I guess you would say. And also it's based on the comic books, the Sandman, the characters. So what else do you think would happen, outwardly, to see the integration and the healing of the wounded king? Like what would you envision?
I would envision a sort of energy in everyone, not just men, but women too, where the integration between these energies would be balanced in such a way that neither side is a threat anymore. The masculine is not threatened by the feminine is not threatened by the masculine. No one's feeling afraid. And, that we can sort of see both sides and come at situations in our personal lives as well as global situations, political issues, from that more well-rounded perspective. So, not dismissing either side, because I'm seeing this too. We do live in patriarchy in the Western world for sure. And, I'm seeing that start to crumble. And I think that's why, there's so much rage out there. But I think that there's also a lot of rage that's been building for many years on the side of the feminine. And this is not the way that we're going to be able to sort of come together to bring something better in. It's going to be, and I think we have to sort of lay down our shields, take off our armor, and be willing to really see the other side, see the wounds on both sides, and in that way develop more compassion and empathy, because you're not going to get this separation and the anger and the hatred and the all of this built up resentment is just going to beget more of that. So I do feel like that integration of both sides and the openness that I hope would result would help us all be able to actually communicate again and come up with more creative solutions to the things that plague us, literally and figuratively, so that we can have respect for all, and understand that both are needed.
Absolutely. So if I, was going to work with any of this Avalonian or the Celtic pantheon, how would you suggest a person pick one to start with? Would you find it, for instance, better if you're kind of drawn to one, let's say you admire a character and kind of just go with that? Do you feel it's also important to work with the ones that you feel uncomfortable with? And when would you do that? And how would you do it?
So I definitely wouldn't go with the ones that make me uncomfortable first, because that's just me. I like to ease into things, but I think yes, if there is a particular archetype or god or goddess that really just, there's something about them that just really kind of captures your imagination and you want to know more, follow that. When you sit in meditation, or you if you journal, or whatever other, I find the creative acts are really what help me connect. So meditation is one thing, and just invite them in and ask them, what I would like to work with you, how would you like that to look? And what can we do together? And see what happens, see what messages you get, pay attention to your intuition, and it will unfold. Sometimes they come to you unbidden. In the example I gave before about Joseph of Arimathea, he was the first one that came to me sort of on the Christian side. And I was like, nope. I'm all set over here. I've got my goddesses, I'm good. And he just kept coming back in meditations. And, I had a vision at one point, and I said, all right, already, like, I don't want to be rude. And, what is it that we need to work together on? And so that can happen too. But I find, particularly with the Celtic gods and goddesses, they're so, they come from the goddess Danu, who is ancient, the oldest of the gods. And she from her came the Tua de Danann, which are the people of the goddess Danu. And they were the original gods of Ireland, and they ruled until the Milesians came in and won that final battle and forced them to live underground, where they then it became known as the Fae. But Danu is also known as a goddess of creativity, artisanship, craftsmanship, poetry, wisdom of all esoteric avenues. So I find that through creating, whether it's just painting or writing or whatever it is that you find is a great is a way that you like to express yourself, they can come through in that way too. And so I would pay attention to those kind of, if you see a specific theme that you want to keep working with, or there's a particular kind of character, if you write fiction, or even if you're drawn to, if you read and you find yourself drawn to the same sort of character all the time, look a little deeper and see. There may be somebody may be trying to get through, or it just might be opening a little door, and this would be a great person for you to work with, because they have something that you need, and they need you too.
And they need you too. That's an interesting take, because I've thought about that. Why do we have devotionals to these beings that are more powerful supposedly than we are? And what do you mean when you say they need us?
I think that, so I always think of that book, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, and how, when we stop believing in the gods, they sort of start fading away. Mm-hmm. And I think that these are gods, goddesses, archetypes, divine beings that have so much to teach us today. And I feel strongly that they need us to get that and to learn from them, because it's like good medicine for us. And they are invested in our lives, in our success, in our, helping us realize our dreams, because I think we're really all an extension of the divine. We are all embodiments, in physical form. We all have that spark within us. And I think, like any being, you wouldn't want to see parts of you walking away or ignoring you or feeling like, I'm not interested or whatever. I think they do need us to keep their magic, their lessons alive. Their stories can be quite intense. And, part of me sometimes intuitively just feels like, I didn't go through all this for nothing. I learned all this so that I can teach you, and you need to listen, So I think they do need us to listen and get it, because it's for our evolution and for us to help, to help us get closer to, fully integrated and more in touch with our divine selves. Because that's better for everybody.
Yeah, and so it really is about a relationship with the divine, and there's so many myriad of ways that one can pursue it, from very formal to very informal. But in this case, since we're talking about such a large pantheon, how would you suggest people work with it so that they actually can build enough depth in a relationship, and not, just kind of scattered, a little of this, a little of that? Because at least in the traditional sort of Tibetan Buddhist teachings, which again is a different topic, but what it says is it's better to kind of go deep with one yidam than to have like 20 you're working with. So, and I'm not saying that one should only work with one, but the idea of not, just sort of, just as things get a little interesting, kind of saying, okay, now I'm gonna go work with another one.
Right.
So what would you suggest people do to not do that?
I think it's a little bit different for everybody, and some people, I think it's going to be natural that you want to sort of explore a little bit with this goddess, and then explore a little bit with that one, to really feel who resonates with you the most, and then work with that deity as deeply as you can go. I think that you can walk with one for a long time, but sometimes it's almost like any friendship, where some friendships are meant to last your whole life, others are meant to last a little while, and you've both done what you needed to do with and for each other, and then it's time to part ways. So I think it can be okay to work with multiple deities, but I think you're right. It's important. Sometimes that can be an avoidance tactic. There are some very strong, powerful, intimidating goddesses, in particular in the Celtic pantheon. The Morrigan is one. I had a pretty intense experience with her, and she she's the queen of tough love, I would say. But I resisted. I didn't want to work with her because I'm quite honestly was afraid of her. I didn't know if I could handle her energy. I didn't know if I could really do that. And she basically wouldn't let me walk away. So I knew that there was the reason why I was afraid to work with her was because there was shadow work I needed to do that I was trying to avoid. She is the queen of the shadows, and she is someone who can really help you with that. And I didn't want to do it. And I'm so glad that I did, because I'm glad that she wouldn't let me go until I did, more to the point. So, I think to look deeply within yourself and see, if you really are just sort of dancing along and dabbling a little over here and a little bit over there. Why is that? Are you trying to avoid something? And if you are, I would encourage you to look at that. I would also say, if there is a particular story or a particular myth that really resonates with you, go deep with that one and the characters and the beings that are just in that, and work with them. Or if there's one that really calls to you, work with that one alone. And then when you feel like you're ready, you can move on to someone else. Or it's an intuitive process. The only other thing I would mention about that is we know there's the pagan wheel of the year, and there are different gods and goddesses associated with different times of year. So that might be a way for someone who's really new to this path. That might be a great way to sort of see how it feels working with these different, and give yourself that year to really kind of work with different ones and see who wants to work with you more closely, who you want to work more closely with, and try it that way. But I do think that there's going to be a bit of experimentation at first until you find that one that you really want to go deep with.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. It's sort of just, you could do it for the whole year and or you could break it up into the quarters or even probably the months, actually. There's probably, you could do that depending on what kind of wheel you're looking at. One thing I wanted to get back to was something you said earlier about what kind of characters you're drawn to when you read and watch shows. And I have to admit, that is a very good way to see the archetype that is calling you. So I know, for instance, I'm always drawn to battle women, and I have been for a long time. But sometimes, like in The Hobbit, maybe when I was young, I really liked some of the magical beings. But as I got older, I really connected to Aragorn, and I really connected to his story, not wanting to take power and the whole journey he had. And so to me, it's always been more about power and battle and courage, whatever the person, from Joan of Arc to sort of literary characters. And I guess to me, when I feel more integrated with that, I probably won't feel as strongly drawn to them. I think Michael has a comment or question.
Yeah, actually, I have a question from one of our listeners who's joining us on our live chat. And her question for Caireann is that if these divine creatures want us to help so much, then why is it that it's so difficult to reach them? Why isn't it easier to connect with them? And I guess, obviously it does take some work sometimes.
It's a really good question. And I wish I had the answer. I think that sometimes we need to be... In my experience, if I've been really drawn to working with a particular goddess, and I'm just not feeling any kind of connection, I keep trying, I keep reaching out in meditations, and she's just not responding. I usually just take that. It took me a while to get there. Initially, honestly, my feelings would get hurt, and I would feel like, why doesn't she want to work with me? I really want to devote, my time and my life with her right now, and it's just not working. Eventually I realized that there's a time and a place, and that maybe it's just not the right time to work with her yet. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe the work would be too demanding. and I'm just not in a place that I can do it right now. More often than not, in hindsight, I look back and that was the case. Sometimes they never come back around. Sometimes they do. So I think that it depends on where you are in your life, how grounded you're feeling emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. But also there is that timing element, and they might be saying, you know what, not yet, but soon or down the road.
That's really good. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I think that just keeping open about who. I think sometimes we can also, I know I do this, or have done in the past, where I kind of romanticize a god or goddess, and I'm like, oh, I really want to work with them. Like, I just love their energy and I love it. But whatever it is that they would have to teach me, like, I'm not coming at it from the place where they need me to be in order to work together. So I have to be open, and sometimes I'll get somebody that I just say, why me? Why do you want to work with me? I have no, I don't really feel like a connection with you or whatever, but I would say stay open, keep your heart open, and you will be surprised at who comes through, and it's usually the right one at the right time.
I would also like to add that I think that we forget that the material world is very dense. And mostly from studying more Kabbalah now, is that the more dense you get into the material world, the harder everything is to do. And that we, as human beings, seem to have a natural impatience, most of us, that we have to develop patience, and that it's the nature of being in a human body that things take longer and are harder, no matter what anybody says, because of the realm itself. And certainly, as the realm kind of opens up more, perhaps some of these laws are going to be seen as very bendable. But even then, I still don't think it's going to be so easy like it is in science fiction movies, you know, to dematerialize and materialize, and, you know, not at least in the next century or so.
Yeah, I agree.
So that was a really good question too, and the other thing I wanted to add was my experience of researching some deities. Some deities seem to be that they're made to be easily reached. You can call their name out when you're in trouble, and anybody can be assisted. Like, that is part of who they are. So like Mary's like that, Tara's like that. You can just, if you're in, you know, in any kind of need, and if you just are open, call out their name, they'll kind of come to you, at least in that moment. And there does seem to be other deities that are very particular. And I'm not sure if that's just a reflection of the human world, or maybe deities have their own complicated world. You know, I don't know. It's just an observation I've seen.
Yeah.
So I'd like to also talk a little bit about some of the symbols that maybe aren't as talked about as much in the pantheon of Avalon, especially. For instance, you know, you had mentioned the round table, and I like round tables. So how do you work with that as a concept in this pantheon?
So the round table, so during the time when the round table was actually created, it had never been seen before, really. When you had meetings of kings and dignitaries from all the, you know, surrounding kingdoms, they would come in and they would sit at a big rectangular table or a square table, or the king himself would be up on a dais and everybody else was beneath him. And this was all about this show of power and who was in charge. Even, you know, with a rectangular table, the king was at the head and everybody else was gathered around. So the round table was really nothing short of revolutionary. Number one, the round shape represents the feminine. Number two, Arthur was sat at that table with everybody else. So he really had the intention of this table, everybody here is equal. Nobody is of greater or lesser importance. And it was a great equalizer, as the expression goes. So, you know, I always think of it as who do you want at your round table? You know, who are your most trusted? advisors, and that is, in this world and the other world. Who do you want having, who do you trust the most to give them equal say? And who are you willing to hear out that you may not have, considered before? It's important to invite other voices in as well. So I do feel that it is a symbol of that sort of, in the way they gathered around the table as this, protection for the divine feminine. That was the ideal, and that's how it all kind of started in Camelot, and then things just kind of didn't go as planned. But yeah, I find that and then, when people talk about the fall of Camelot, they talk about the breaking of the Round Table, and how really that it's like that ideal was broken at the time, and with it went along the ideal of Camelot and the whole kingdom and Arthur himself. The breaking of the Round Table is very symbolic of his wound as well.
Very true. And when you think about, if you look at sort of just, for instance, jobs and titles and the concept of the round table, that I can be, say, a CEO, but if I don't equally respect the sort of lowest rank of my corporation, then I am really not building a very holistic company. And that's always troubled me, is because I worked as a secretary for years, and I never understood why, secretaries were seen in any kind of lower world, especially since I did so much work, that I had an equal role. I kept things moving. I answered phones. I put people together. In my mind, even when people say, "Oh, you're just a secretary," I thought, well, no, I'm a secretary. I'm proud of it. I work really hard. I'm typing hard. I'm a key player. And that one of the things I think that's still very missing in the Western world is that we get so carried away with titles, and spiritually, oh my God, it's incredible. I am the high priestess mucky muck, and and again, it's a role. It's something that you take on that has supposedly certain responsibilities, but it doesn't make you better or more important. And that has really disappointed me, particularly in witchcraft, is how many people have made themselves into being special. When I was kind of drawn to the goddess movement because of the equalizing energy, and also, like, even in a coven, there's only supposed to be 13 people, which is a good enough group to have like a meaningful interaction without getting a lot of power dynamics, right? So I thought that was really, really brilliant. It's like, wow. And then, you sort of have your beehive effect and you go and start another coven. But I'm very disappointed in a lot of the goddess movement and the pagan movement, in how people have just taken some of that same patriarchal idea and made themselves important.
Yeah, I can't agree more, and it just goes to show you how ingrained that patriarchal ideal is, because we try to, in our minds, we try to get away from it, but we end up recreating it again and again, and that is something that has put me off as well in those circles. And I think that, to bring it back to this wounded king idea, and that we all have that wounded king within us. I do think that, people can be drawn to these paths for reasons of feeling powerless, and they want to feel that sense of like, I am important, I am special, I have power in this world. And so they latch on to these titles and these, positions as, I'm up here and you guys are all down there because, if you weren't all down there, then I wouldn't be up here. So it's a tricky thing. And I think that's where we can choose to be a part of something like that or not. I think if you do choose to be a part of a group like that and you see this dynamic happening, one, have some compassion and empathy for that person, because they're clearly operating out of a wound or something in their shadow that they don't, this is how they think they're dealing with it, and this is how they think they're gonna sort of overcome that. But guard your energy, guard your, and do it if it works for you. But if it doesn't, don't spend any more time in that, and don't contribute to the dynamic, because that's not going to help that person. they may or may not want to hear how you feel about it. But I think that, by choosing to sort of, I've seen a lot of these, I lived in Salem, Massachusetts for a long time. And there are groups there are different covens there that are always, they call them, in the media, they'll say, oh, it's like the witch wars, this one coven is annoyed at the other one. And there's all these like nasty, people will be interviewed and saying nasty things about the other coven. And, it's not by any means everybody there, but there's a couple that, and I just chose to not get involved with any of it because I'm not interested in, I'm drawn to this path because I want to expand spiritually. I want to expand as a human and be a better person and contribute in a better way to, this planet while I'm here. So I don't have really time and energy to spend on all of that. They've got their stuff to work out, and, I wish them the best and I hope that they, are able to do so. But I don't want to spend my energy on drama and things like that when, it's really better put to use.
It's true. Very true. And I think Michael had a comment.
Yeah, I think Caireann will get a real charge out of this. But back in Nova Scotia, Krista and I created a little working group magically, and we would do rituals for the full moon or monthly. And we definitely wanted to get away from all the hierarchy stuff as far as we could get. So in our group, instead of having a high priestess, it was the duty witch. And that was the title they had, was the duty witch that month. So it was up to them to figure out what the ritual was going to be and organize it and everything, since they had the responsibility. And then at the end of the ritual, the last part of it was the duty witch would hold straws and everybody else would draw straws. And whoever got the short straw would be the duty witch for the next month. So nobody was ever a duty witch 2 months in a row. And it really great because it's sort of, and the nice part with that is the cool thing about it was everybody had a different style. So 1 month something would be very structured and very formal. The next thing would be very free form. And so you didn't get sort of trapped into this sort of one way of doing things over and over. And everybody had their own personality. Every ritual had its own personality. It was actually quite a lot of fun. So feel free to steal the duty witch concept. It was really great at getting away from the hierarchy.
That was fun.
What a great creative solution.
Yeah.
I love that.
But you're right, not to get caught up in the drama. I suppose you might initially, if you're like attending groups and you're involved. I'm not as active in groups as I used to be, mostly because I'm doing more of my own work right now and I'm busy with life. But it makes sense to, you can, say, well, I don't want to participate in this drama. Why I'm in this spiritual tradition is for my own growth. And you're right, then you don't get kind of hooked into it.
It's like anything, right? I mean, at work, there's always something going on that everybody wants to get, all dramatic about or whatever. It's just about protecting your energy and directing it where it can serve the best, serve yourself and serve others.
So we're getting a little closer to the end. I did want to just have a shout out for how people can contact you. And your email is caireannfrasca@outlook.com. That's spelled CAIREANNFRASCA. It's probably going to be on the screen too. And we'll certainly have a link on our website to reach you. And then also your on Facebook, you said earlier as well. And you also teach courses, is that correct?
I do, yes. So I teach through an online school called Mother House of the Goddess. And Mother House of the Goddess is the parent organization. Mystery School of the Goddess is the school itself. And I'm one of many teachers there. There are some wonderful classes offered. But that website is mysteryschoolofthegoddess.net. I have a class called the Celtic Almanac, which is, it started last October and it goes through this September. I will do it again starting in this October as a self-study, but that's basically a walk through the Wheel of the Celtic year. We look at different goddesses every month. There's rituals and meditations and things like that as well. And then the other course I'm offering at the moment is Into the Heart of Avalon, which is the deep dive into the different spiritual paths that converge there. I do also have a free course about Morrigan Le Fay, which is a great introduction to Avalonian spirituality. And if you want to get to know Morgan a little bit better, which I encourage you to do because she's wonderful. She's one of my favorite goddesses to work with, and she's a real symbol of that divine feminine empowerment, and can really help you bring that out in yourself as well. So
now, in my understanding is Morgan Le Fay is different from the Morgan. Is that true?
Yes, they're in a lot of. There are many people who think that they are the same, but they're not. At least in my experience, there may be some connection. I think a lot of people, because the crow and the raven are both symbolic of both of those goddesses, I think that's part of it. Morgan is the high priestess of Avalon. She is a healer, a sorceress. She is very well schooled in the arts in the magical arts, herbalism, and she's the sort of the ultimate priestess. Whereas the Morrigan is a goddess of battle, of war, and of love too. But really, she's predominantly a triple goddess of battle. She's also considered a mother goddess, believe it or not.
Yeah, I think Laura O'Brien would have a different take on that. I was listening to her course too about the mother and the love stuff. She's pretty much not a fan of that. But one thing she did say that was interesting about the Morgan is she's a goddess of change, and crows are associated with change, which I only learned through someone who rescues crows, actually. I'd never considered that before. And so I thought that was kind of a new take. There's always something new and different when you talk to anyone about the deities, which I really like, their own takes and experiences and research, and it just keeps your own mind kind of active and interested. Like any relationship, right? There's so much to it.
That's right. And seeing them, you may have your own experience, but then seeing them through someone else's eyes, you can have a whole new perspective. So, I agree with the change aspect to both the Morgan and Morgan Le Fay. Actually, she's considered a shapeshifter as well. And so, I think she's a wonderful embodiment of that potential for change and transformation.
Then both of them would be kind of a good time to work with now because of all the forced change that we have going on in our life. And I suppose one could sometimes just look at what's going on in the world and see the deity that might help you through that particular aspect and balance it. And so both of them would sound like both would be helpful.
Agreed. Yes.
So is there anything last thing to say about the working with the concept of the divine masculine and feminine archetypes in any spiritual practice? What are your sort of thoughts or anything more you want to say about that?
I think, for me, part of my personal journey has been, like many women, many humans, I've been really lived much of my life in that masculine energy and from that masculine place of got to get it done, got to make it happen, push, go, go, go. And it's been, since I found the goddess path years ago, it's really been about integrating that feminine energy more and more into my life. And cultivating that within myself, because for me, the goal is the balance of those two energies and tapping into each one as the situation. We need both. So tapping into each one as the situation demands and being able to flow between them. I think of that symbol of the Vesica Pisces, which is the two interlocking circles. And through that center is where that divine empowerment comes through. You've got your divine masculine, your divine feminine, and then the sum of both of those parts is even greater. So for me, that's a symbol of my sort of personal spiritual quest. And I think that, the more that we can encourage people to look at that within themselves and to move towards that goal for themselves, I just think it's going to be the best thing for everybody. And I think that is the healthy way forward on the other side of everything that's going on right now. Just not just COVID, but, all the global changes that are happening. We really are in the midst of a huge time of transformation, as we said. And I think if we know how to kind of flow between the masculine and feminine energies within ourselves, I think we'll be much better able to navigate the changes and build something better on the other side.
I think that's a beautiful way to end today's topic. I love it, and I love the symbol too. It's a wonderful symbol. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been great having you. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to, maybe in the future having you back for some other topic, but we are very happy you came on.
Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure. I had a great time and would love to do it again.
Awesome. And thank you all for watching today, and thank you for your comments during the show. We really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or listen on podcast, and please like the video if you like it. And anyway, I will see you next week when we continue to journey together around the esoteric and the obscure. Have a great week.